The funeral home smelled like cut stems and grief, and something underneath both of those things that Claire Rowan couldn't name until she watched the boy reach into the centerpiece and pull out a white rose by the root. He didn't throw it, didn't cry. He just held it for a moment, staring at it the way you stare at something that has offended you personally. And then he set it on the floor with a precision that was almost surgical. Then he reached in and pulled out another. Nobody moved. The florist assistant by the door went pale. The funeral director, a thin man named Gerald who wore his professionalism like body armor, started forward, and Claire put her hand on his arm without looking at him. "Don't," she said quietly. "He's destroying the arrangement. He's doing something else." She watched the boy work. 8 years old, maybe. Dark circles under his eyes that had no business being on a child's face. His name was Elliot. She'd heard someone say that earlier. And his mother was in the casket 12 feet away, and everyone in this room was treating him like a problem that needed managing. If you've ever stood at a crossroads where one wrong word could break someone who's already cracked, you know exactly what Claire felt in that moment. And if you've ever been that someone, the one on the verge, the one everyone was watching with that particular kind of worried helplessness, then you already understand why what she did next mattered more than anything else that would happen in that room for the rest of the day. She walked to the work table in the corner, picked up a square of white paper, and started folding. Well, before we go further, if this story is reaching you wherever you are, please like and drop a comment with your city or country. I want to know how far this has traveled. Subscribe if you haven't, because the story only gets more complicated from here, and you don't want to miss what happens next. Claire Rowan had been making flowers out of paper since she was 6 years old, when her grandmother taught her that you could build something beautiful out of almost nothing if your hands were patient enough. She ran a small shop on the north side of Chicago called Rowan and Stem. Nothing fancy. A hand-lettered sign above the door, mismatched chairs for customers who wanted to sit and think, a back room that smelled permanently of eucalyptus and damp floral foam. She'd built the business herself over 11 years, which meant she'd also built the debt herself, and the long hours, and the specific kind of exhaustion that comes from caring deeply about something that the market treats as decorative. She hired 2 part-time assistants. She knew her regular customers by name and remembered their anniversaries, their losses, the particular flowers that made them feel held rather than simply presented with. She was good at her work because she paid attention. That was the whole of it, really. She paid attention to what people actually wanted, which was almost never what they said they wanted. A customer who came in asking for something cheerful was usually processing something sad. A customer who said they didn't care about the price usually cared very much about being taken seriously. She'd learned to read the gap between the request and the need, and she'd learned to build the arrangement for the need, which was why she was standing in the Halstead funeral home on a Tuesday in October with a half-folded paper daisy in her hands, watching a small boy systematically dismantle $50 worth of white roses. The arrangement had been called in 2 days ago. A memorial bouquet for Elena Moretti, née Marino. Claire had taken the order herself. The family had specified white roses, formal, traditional, 60 stems, baby's breath, a silk ribbon in cream. She'd built it exactly as requested, delivered it that morning, and thought nothing more about it until Elliot started pulling it apart. Now she was rethinking the whole thing. She finished the paper daisy. It wasn't her best work. She'd rushed it, and one of the petals was slightly uneven, but it held together. She crossed the room at an angle that put her beside the boy without putting herself in front of him, which was a distinction that mattered. She set the paper flower on the edge of the table beside the arrangement without saying anything. Elliot stopped. He looked at the paper daisy. He looked at it for a long time. Then he looked up at Claire with an expression she couldn't fully decode. Not suspicious, not grateful, something more complicated than either. He looked like someone who had just heard a word in a foreign language that he recognized but hadn't expected. He picked up the paper daisy and held it carefully. Gerald appeared at Claire's elbow. "Ms. Rowan," he murmured with the particular tone of someone who is being professional about being furious. "The family needs a minute," she said, not moving. "The senior Morettis are arriving in 40 minutes. Then we have 40 minutes. She was aware of the figure standing across the room. She'd been aware of him since she walked in. It was hard not to be. I was the kind of man who occupied space differently than other people, who seemed to pull a room's gravitational center toward himself without appearing to try. He was standing near the door with his arms crossed, watching her and the boy with an expression she couldn't read from this distance. Vincent Moretti. She hadn't known who he was when she took the order. She'd figured it out from context over the course of the morning, the way people spoke to him, the way they slightly changed their posture and their word choices when he was nearby. The two very large men who stood outside the front entrance of the funeral home and were not there to help with parking. She'd heard of him. Most people in Chicago had, if they paid any attention to the kind of news that didn't make the front page. Vincent Moretti ran things. That was the phrase people used, vague enough to be plausible, deniable, specific enough that everyone understood. He ran things on the north side and sometimes on the south side, and sometimes in certain city offices that were supposed to be independent of anyone running anything. He was Elena's brother. And he was looking at Claire now with an expression that had shifted from unreadable to something more focused, more intent, and she made herself keep her attention on Elliot because that was what mattered. The boy was still holding the paper daisy. He was running his thumb along one of the folded petals, back and forth, feeling the edge of it. She didn't like white roses, he said. His voice was barely above a whisper. Claire wasn't sure he'd meant to say it out loud. What did she like? She asked, matching his volume. Elliot's jaw tightened. He looked at the arrangement on the table, the 60 white stems, formal and perfect and cold. Daisies, he said, the real kind, and the little blue ones. He paused. She said white roses were for people who wanted to look like they cared. Claire felt something move through her chest. She looked at the arrangement again. 60 white roses, silk ribbon, formal, traditional. Who called in the order? She asked, keeping her voice neutral. Sophia did. He said the name with a flatness that was worse than anger. Who's Sophia? Dad's cousin. A pause. She says she's trying to help. Claire set that information down carefully in her mind, the way you set down something fragile. She looked at the white roses. She thought about what it meant that a woman who was supposedly helping a grieving family had ordered 60 stems of flowers that the dead woman specifically didn't like, for a reason she was starting to suspect had nothing to do with Elena Moretti and everything to do with who would be in the room watching. Elliot, she said, can I ask you something? He looked at her sideways, still holding the paper daisy. If you could change the flowers, all of them, what would you put here instead? The question seemed to surprise him. He thought about it seriously, which she appreciated. He wasn't the kind of child who gave quick answers. Daisies, he said finally, the white ones with the yellow centers, not the fancy kind. And the blue ones, forget-me-nots, she called them. And rosemary. She grew rosemary on the kitchen windowsill. He stopped. His voice had gotten tighter. She made me smell it sometimes. She said it was for remembering. Claire nodded. She pulled out her phone and made a note. Good, she said. That's exactly right. She straightened up and turned to face the room and found Vincent Moretti standing 6 feet away, watching her with an expression that was somewhere between careful and undone. He was closer up than she'd realized. Somewhere in his mid-40s, dark-featured, with the kind of stillness that reads as controlled until you look at his hands, which were loose at his sides but not relaxed. There was something happening behind his eyes that his face was working very hard to keep contained. Who are you? He asked. Not aggressive. Genuinely uncertain, like the question didn't have an easy answer. I did the flowers, Claire said. I'm the one who got the order wrong. He frowned. You followed the order. I followed the wrong order. She paused. Mr. Moretti, your nephew just told me that your sister didn't like white roses. He told me she grew rosemary on her windowsill and that she called forget-me-nots by name. She kept her voice even. Who gave me the specifications for this arrangement? The stillness in him shifted. It was subtle. The way a weather change is subtle, in the moment before the temperature drops. Sophia, he said. That's what Elliot said. A long pause, the kind of pause that contains a great deal of compressed weight. He talked to you, Vincent said. He wasn't asking. He was processing. His eyes moved to Elliot, who was still standing at the table, still holding the paper daisy, watching both of them with the wary attention of someone who has learned to monitor adults for signs of incoming disruption. He did, Claire said. He hasn't spoken to anyone in 3 weeks. Vincent said it quietly, and there was something in his voice that was almost frightening in its rawness. A man who commanded significant portions of Chicago's underground economy, standing in a funeral home, undone by the knowledge that his grieving nephew had just spoken to a florist he'd never met. Not since Elena. He stopped, cleared his throat. Not since then. Claire understood then why Elliot's voice had been so quiet. Not shyness. Something heavier. He's not broken, she said. He's being very precise about who deserves his words. Vincent looked at her. Something shifted in the room's atmosphere, almost imperceptibly. Claire had the distinct sensation that she had just said something that landed very differently than she'd intended, in a part of him she hadn't been aiming for. I want to redo the arrangement, she said, before the moment could become something it didn't need to be. Everything. Daisies, forget-me-nots, rosemary, handmade additions. I have what I need in my van, and I can have it done in 30 minutes. She paused. Your family may not like it. My family can handle not liking something. The people Sophia was trying to impress. I'm aware of who Sophia was trying to impress, he said, and now there was an edge in his voice that had not been there a moment ago, precise and cold. I'll take care of Sophia. Okay, Claire said. Then I'll take care of the flowers. She turned back to the table and started clearing the white roses, working efficiently, not roughly. Behind her, she heard Vincent cross the room. She heard his voice, low and controlled, saying something she couldn't make out. She heard the specific quality of silence that follows when someone who is used to being obeyed says something that nobody argues with. Then she heard a woman's voice, rising, and she recognized the tone even if she couldn't hear the words. Indignation, the particular flavor of it that comes from someone who feels they've been publicly corrected after extensive effort to make themselves look good. Claire kept working. She unloaded her van in 3 trips, carrying in bundles of white daisies, stems of rosemary, small clusters of forget-me-nots in dusty blue. She'd had them in this van because she always kept extras on orders this size, a habit she'd developed after a particularly bad experience with a damaged delivery 3 years ago. She was halfway through rebuilding the arrangement when she felt Elliot at her elbow. She didn't look at him. She kept working. She'd learned that sometimes the best way to invite someone in was to make the activity look absorbing enough that there was something real to join. Can I help? He asked. Yeah, she said. See the rosemary? Can you sort it into bunches? About that long. She measured with her fingers, showing him. He started sorting without another word. They worked in silence for a few minutes. It was a functional silence, the kind that comes from 2 people being occupied with the same task. And Claire found herself thinking about what Elliot had said, that his mother's white roses were for people who wanted to look like they cared. 8 years old. He'd understood something that most adults spend years learning to articulate. She used to make paper flowers sometimes, Elliot said. He wasn't looking at Claire. He was looking at the rosemary in his hands. Your mom? Yeah, not as good as yours. A pause. Mine either. Nobody's are good the first time, Claire said, or the 10th time. She had this one she'd been working on for a while, a big one. She didn't finish it. Claire kept her hands moving. She didn't rush toward the emotion in what he was saying. She let it sit in the air between them. Is it still somewhere? She asked. Elliot nodded once, small and tight. Then it'll keep, she said, until you're ready. He didn't answer that, but he stayed beside her, sorting rosemary with careful small hands, and she took that as its own kind of answer. Across the room, Vincent stood near the door with Gerald, who appeared to be explaining something about timeline, and Vincent appeared to be listening while simultaneously watching Claire and Elliot with an expression that had nothing professional in it at all. It was the expression of a man who was seeing something he hadn't known he needed to see. The woman who had been arguing, Sophia Marino, Claire had pieced together from context, sharp-featured and well-dressed in a way that felt curated rather than comfortable, had gone quiet after Vincent's conversation with her. She stood near the back wall now, holding her own posture like a weapon, looking at Claire with eyes that had a specific calculation in them. Not anger, exactly. Assessment. The look of someone who has just encountered an unexpected variable and is deciding how to account for it. Claire didn't have much patience for that kind of looking. She'd encountered it before, usually from people who were accustomed to being the most useful person in the room and had just met someone who was useful in a way they didn't control. She finished the main arrangement at the 30-minute mark. It looked nothing like what she'd delivered that morning. It looked like something grown rather than arranged, layered and textured and specific, the kind of thing you only build when you know what the person actually loved. The forget-me-nots ran through it in clusters, small and stubborn. The rosemary gave it a scent that was clean and slightly sharp. The daisies anchored it without dominating it. Elliot had stopped sorting. He was looking at the finished piece. "That's her," he said quietly. "That looks like her." And then, before Claire could say anything, he reached into the pocket of his jacket and took out a folded square of paper. He unfolded it carefully, smoothed it against his palm. It was a paper flower, half finished, the petals uneven, one side folded differently than the other. He set it against the base of the arrangement with a precision that was almost ceremonial. Claire looked at it, then she looked at Elliot. "Is that hers?" she asked. He nodded. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she picked up the paper daisy she'd made earlier and set it beside Elena's unfinished one, close but not touching. "Now she's not the only one," she said. Elliot looked at the two flowers for a long time. His jaw was tight. His eyes were bright in a way that had nothing to do with happiness and everything to do with the specific quality of grief in someone who hasn't cried yet because they haven't found the right container for it. Then he nodded again. "Just once." Vincent was behind them. Claire hadn't heard him move, but she could feel the shift in the room's weight. She didn't turn around. "The family's arriving in 10 minutes, Gerald said from somewhere to her left. "We're ready," Claire said. She stepped back from the arrangement and looked at it one more time. It wasn't perfect. The forget-me-nots on the left side were slightly crowded, and she'd have moved the rosemary if she'd had another 5 minutes. But it was true. It was Elena Moretti as described by her 8-year-old son, and that was worth more than perfect. She started gathering her materials. Behind her, she heard Vincent say something low and specific to Gerald, and Gerald's footsteps moved away quickly. She heard Sophia's voice again, a sharp syllable of objection, and then silence. The particular silence that follows when someone has decided arguing is no longer worth the cost. She was wrapping the leftover stems in paper when she heard Vincent's voice directly behind her. 47 minutes, he said. She turned. He was looking at the arrangement, not at her, but his attention was different from before, less contained. Something in him had loosened by a degree or two, like a fist that had been held closed for a long time and had just begun to open. "For what?" she asked. "From when I thought this was going to be a disaster." He glanced at her. "To now." Claire looked at him for a moment. She was trying to figure out if he was grateful or if he was doing something else, something more practiced, and she honestly couldn't tell, which was unusual. She was good at telling. "Your nephew told me what she liked," she said. "I just listened." Vincent looked at the arrangement again, at Elena's unfinished paper flower and the finished daisy beside it. His face did something complicated. "He talked to you," he said again, like he was still working through what that meant. "He's paying attention to everything," Claire said. "He's always been communicating. It's just that the flowers were the wrong language." Vincent turned to look at her then, fully, and for the first time she got the complete version of his attention. It was a lot of attention. She held it without looking away, which seemed to register as something, though she couldn't quite read what. "What do I owe you?" he asked. "For the rebuild?" She thought about it. The materials ran about $60 over the original quote. Beyond that, nothing. This is what the order should have been. He started to reach into his jacket, and she shook her head. "The $60, she said. "That's it." He stopped, looked at her with something that was almost puzzlement, like he was encountering a policy he didn't have a precedent for. "All right," he said finally. She finished packing her bag. The family was beginning to arrive. She could hear voices in the entryway, the specific low murmur of people gathering around grief. She needed to clear out before she became part of the furniture. She was heading for the door when Elliot appeared at her side. He had the paper daisy in his hand, the one she'd made, not his mother's. He held it out to her. She looked at it, then at him. "You keep it," she said. He considered this. Then he pulled it back against his chest, holding it carefully, and gave her the kind of look that contained several sentences he wasn't going to say. "Thank you," he said, very quiet. "You did most of the work," she said. "I just brought better materials." She went out into the October afternoon, where the light was thin and cold, and the two large men by the door watched her load her van with the professional neutrality of people whose job it was to watch things. She drove back to Rowan and Stem with the smell of rosemary still on her hands, thinking about what Elliot had said. She said white roses were for people who wanted to look like they cared. Claire sat at the red light at Ashland and thought about Sophia Marino and the original order and the very precise way Vincent Moretti's jaw had tightened when he understood what his cousin had done. She thought about what Sophia had been trying to accomplish, the impression she'd been constructing, the audience she'd been performing for, and she thought about Elena's kitchen windowsill with its pot of rosemary and the unfinished paper flower in a dead woman's pocket that her son had been carrying for 3 weeks. The light changed. Claire drove. She was back at the shop, getting out of the van, when her phone buzzed. An unknown number. She answered anyway. Ms. Rowan. Vincent's voice. She hadn't given him her cell number, which meant he'd gotten it some other way, which was a fact she filed carefully. Mr. Moretti. I wanted to say a pause. He seemed to be choosing words with more care than he was used to needing. What you did today? It mattered. Okay, she said. That's not why I'm calling. Another pause. My nephew. He's going to need... He stopped. Started again. I don't know what he needs. I don't know how to give it to him. I've spent 30 years knowing how to handle every kind of situation, and I am completely without any idea how to help this child. The admission seemed to cost him something. Claire could hear it in the slight roughness around the edges of his voice. She stood in the parking lot behind her shop with the phone against her ear and the cold afternoon light slanting across the asphalt. He needs to not be managed, she said. He needs someone to sit beside him without an agenda. He's been watching every adult in his life perform their grief or perform their competence or perform their support. He needs someone who isn't performing anything. A long silence. That, Vincent said, is harder than it sounds. I know, she said. Most real things are. She said goodbye and went inside. She made herself a cup of coffee she didn't drink and sat at the work table for a while, looking at nothing. The shop was quiet in the late afternoon, the way it got when the last customer had gone and the flowers were resting in their cold water and the day was almost done. She was thinking about the way Elliot had set his mother's unfinished paper flower beside the arrangement, the care in it, the intention. He's not broken. She'd said that to Vincent, and she'd meant it, but she was aware now of the full weight of what she'd also said without meaning to, that someone in this situation had to be not broken, had to be capable of still paying attention and still choosing who got his words, and that the effort it took to hold yourself that carefully together at 8 years old, in the middle of the worst thing that had ever happened to you, was not a sign of resilience. It was a sign of how alone he was. She pulled a sheet of paper toward her and started folding. Not a daisy this time, something more complicated. She wasn't sure what it was going to be yet. Her hands moved on their own, the way they did when she was working something out, and she let them move, and outside the window the Chicago afternoon went gray and cold in particular, and the rosemary smell was finally fading from her hands. The call came at 6:47 in the morning, 3 days after the funeral. Claire was in the back room of Rowan and Stem, stripping thorns off a batch of garden roses before the morning rush, her hands moving on autopilot while her coffee went cold on the corner of the workbench. The phone buzzed against the wood, and she looked at the screen without stopping what she was doing, expecting a supplier, expecting a customer rescheduling, expecting anything except the same unknown number from 3 nights ago. She set down the rose stem and answered. There's a situation, Vincent said, no greeting. With Elliot. What kind of situation? The kind where he's locked himself in the bathroom at my house and won't come out, and I've been standing outside the door for 40 minutes, and I've run out of things to say through it. Claire was already pulling off her work apron. What started it? A pause. The kind that meant he knew exactly what started it and didn't want to say it. Sophia came by. Why? She said she wanted to apologize. Another pause. She brought white roses. Claire closed her eyes for exactly 2 seconds. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Text me the address. The address he sent was in Lincoln Park, a street of brownstones set back from the sidewalk, the kind of neighborhood where the money was old enough that nobody had to announce it. She pulled up in her van with the Rowan and Stem logo on the side and felt acutely, briefly aware of what that looked like against this backdrop, and then let it go because it didn't matter. One of the 2 men from the funeral home was standing outside the front door. He stepped aside when she approached without her having to explain herself, which meant Vincent had told them she was coming, which meant he'd been certain she would. She filed that away and knocked. Vincent opened the door himself. He was in a gray shirt with the sleeves pushed up, no jacket, and he looked like a man who had not slept and was not going to admit it. Behind him, the house was quiet and large and furnished with the specific impersonal precision of someone who'd hired a decorator and then ignored the results. "He's still in the bathroom?" she asked. "Yes." "Did Sophia leave?" "After I made my position on the visit clear." "Okay." She stepped inside. "Which way?" He took her up the stairs without talking. She followed him down a hallway lined with photographs she didn't look at closely, though she noted there were more of Elena than of anyone else. He stopped in front of a closed door. Underneath it, a thin band of light. Claire crouched down so she was level with the bottom of the door. "Elliot." She kept her voice flat. Not gentle, not careful, just normal. "It's Claire from the flower shop. I'm not here to make you come out." Silence. "I just drove across town with my apron still in my hand, which means I'm a little cold, and also I'm going to have to go back and finish the roses I was stripping, or I'll have wasted about $40 of inventory. So I'm going to sit down on this floor for a while, if that's okay with you." She sat down with her back against the wall beside the door, drawing her knees up. She looked at the opposite wall. She didn't look at Vincent, who was standing 4 feet away with his arms crossed, watching her with an expression that was somewhere between skeptical and desperate. Silence from behind the door. But a different kind of silence. The listening kind. "She brought white roses," Elliot said. His voice was muffled but clear. "I heard." "She said she was sorry. She kept smiling while she said it." Claire nodded, though he couldn't see her. "That's a particular kind of sorry. It's not real sorry." "No," she said. "It's not." Another silence. Then Uncle Vincent yelled at her. "Did it help?" A pause. "A little." Vincent made a sound that was almost not a sound. Claire still didn't look at him. "Elliot," she said, "do you want to come out? Or do you want to stay in there a while longer? Either one is fine." A very long pause. Then the lock clicked. The door opened 3 inches. One eye appeared in the gap, looking at Claire on the floor, then up at Vincent. "Can you make her not come back?" Elliot asked Vincent. Directly. No preamble. Vincent unfolded his arms. "Yes." "You said that last time about the hospital people." "The hospital people came back twice." Vincent paused. "Sophia won't." Something passed between the man and the boy in the quality of that sentence. A weight, a certainty, the specific gravity of a promise made by someone who does not make promises lightly because he does not have to. The door opened fully. Elliot was wearing pajamas and one sock. He looked at Claire on the floor and then sat down beside her, back against the wall, mirroring her posture. "You're going to get your jeans dirty," he said. "They're already dirty. I was stripping roses." He thought about that. "Does it hurt them?" "The roses?" She shook her head. "The thorns hurt me more than the stripping hurts them. That's sort of the nature of roses." He was quiet for a moment, processing this with the seriousness he applied to everything. Then, "She touched the flowers at the memorial, Sophia. She kept moving them." Claire looked at him. "Which ones?" "The ones we put in. She kept moving them to the back, when she thought no one was looking." The cold that moved through Claire was not temperature. It was the specific chill of understanding something you'd suspected but hadn't confirmed. She made herself breathe evenly. "When did you see this?" she asked. "During the service. She did it like 3 times. I watched her." "Did you tell anyone?" Elliot glanced at Vincent, who was still standing in the hallway. "I didn't have words yet." The silence that followed was the loudest thing in the house. Vincent's jaw had gone tight in a way that rearranged his whole face. He was looking at a spot on the wall above Elliot's head with the focused, controlled blankness of a man who is deciding how angry to be and in which direction to aim it. "Okay," Claire said, keeping her voice level. "Okay. Thank you for telling us." "Is it bad?" Elliot asked. "Yeah," she said, "but it's the kind of bad that was already there. You didn't make it." He looked at his one bare foot. "I know," he said. "I just couldn't stop seeing it." She nodded. She understood that. The thing you can't unsee once you've seen it. The image that sits in front of everything else and won't move. She'd had a few of those herself. They sat on the floor for another 10 minutes, not talking much. Eventually, Vincent went downstairs and came back with a glass of water and a piece of toast that Elliot ate without being asked to, which seemed to surprise Vincent slightly. Claire watched him note this with the intense focus of someone studying a system he didn't have the manual for. When Elliot finally went back to his room, Vincent followed her downstairs in a silence that pressed on both of them until they reached the kitchen, which was large and efficient and had a pot of coffee on that looked recent. "Tell me what you're thinking," Vincent said. "I'm thinking Sophia didn't just change the flower order." Claire turned to face him. She was still working the room at the memorial, still managing what the arrangements looked like to the guests. That's not guilt about making a mistake. That's an ongoing project. What kind of project? I don't know. That's what you need to figure out. His expression shifted. I thought I was figuring it out. You expelled her from the flower shop and told her not to come back here. That's not figuring out. That's moving a problem to another room. He looked at her. The kitchen was quiet. Somewhere upstairs, Elliot's door had closed. You don't talk to me like most people do, Vincent said. I'm not most people. No. He poured coffee without asking if she wanted any, set a mug in front of her. You're not. She took the coffee because it was 6 degrees warmer in her hands than out. She thought about Sophia Marino at the memorial service, moving the wildflowers to the back while the family sat in the front row and couldn't see her, moving them repeatedly. 3 times. The patience of it was what bothered Claire most. Not a single impulsive act of pettiness, but a sustained campaign, quiet and incremental, conducted in the middle of a funeral. What does Sophia want? Claire asked. Vincent sat down at the kitchen table with his own coffee. He looked at it. The company. Elena's share. Elena had a share of a legitimate business, import-export, partially. He said the word with the particular precision of someone who is being accurate while also being minimal. Elena owned 40%, left in trust to Elliot until he's 25. Sophia is the trustee. Claire put down her mug. She's the trustee. My sister trusted her. A pause. The quality of pain in those 4 words was so compressed it barely registered as pain at all. She was the only family Elena had left besides me and Elliot, and my sister knew what I was and what that meant, and she wanted Elliot to have someone more— He stopped. More ordinary. To manage things. When was Sophia appointed trustee? 8 months before Elena got sick. His jaw tightened again. Before anyone knew she was going to. The silence stretched out. How long did Elena know? Claire asked. She was diagnosed 14 months ago. She told me 6 months ago. He said this flatly. She didn't want me to make decisions based on it. She wanted to handle her own affairs. He turned the coffee mug in his hands, a slow, deliberate rotation. By the time I knew, Sophia was already in place. Claire sat with that. She was trying to construct a timeline in her head, and every version of the timeline she constructed had the same problem. The appointment of Sophia as trustee, before the diagnosis was public, before most people knew, which either meant Sophia had known earlier than she was supposed to, or it meant something else, something with sharper edges. Vincent. She kept her voice careful. Who told Sophia that Elena was sick? He went very still. The stillness was different from his usual contained quality. This was the stillness of someone who has just been handed a piece of information that rearranges everything behind it. Elena said she told her herself. His voice had flattened. That she'd confided in her first. Before me. And you believe that? I had no reason not to. Claire didn't say anything. She let him get there on his own because it was going to land harder that way, and she thought he needed it to land hard. He got there. She could see the exact moment he arrived. A shift around his eyes, a quality of compression in his expression, like something being reduced to its essential weight. You think Sophia knew before Elena told her? He said it carefully, like he was feeling each word for structural integrity. I think the flowers were the first thing I saw, Claire said. I think an 8-year-old boy noticed her rearranging the memorial 3 times during the service. I think she came back here 3 days later with white roses and a smile that didn't reach anywhere useful. She paused. I think you should find out how Sophia knew. Vincent stood up from the table. He wasn't dramatic about it. He just stood up and walked to the window and stood there looking at the street outside with his hands in his pockets and his shoulders very straight. If she knew, he said, not turning around, it means she had access to Elena's medical records, or to someone who did. Yes. That kind of access doesn't happen by accident. No. Another long pause. When he turned around, his face was composed in the way that things are composed when they've been very recently broken and are being held together by force of will rather than structure. I want to go through the original order for the flowers, he said. The one Sophia called in. Can you pull that up? I have it at the shop. I want to see the original documentation, whatever she specified, whatever name the order was placed under. Okay, Claire stood. I'll go get it. I'll drive you. She looked at him. I have my van. I know you do. She thought about arguing and decided it wasn't the argument that mattered right now. Okay, she said. They left Elliot with one of Vincent's people, a quiet older man named Ray, who had grandchildren and a particular talent for sitting in the same room as a child without requiring anything from them. Elliot seemed to tolerate Ray with the same careful assessment he applied to everyone, and Claire thought he'd be okay for an hour. In the car, which was black and large and had the particular interior quality of vehicles that are very good at not letting the outside world in, she tried to organize what she knew into some kind of order. Sophia had known about Elena's illness early. She had been appointed trustee of a significant trust. She had changed the flower order for the memorial. She had attended the memorial and continued adjusting the arrangements. She had come back 3 days later with white roses and an apologetic performance that had driven Elliot into a bathroom. None of these things individually were conclusive. Taken together, they formed a shape, and the shape was ugly. She was at the hospital, Vincent said, from behind the wheel. He said it like he was talking to himself, working something out. More than I knew about. Elena mentioned it. I thought it was kindness. When was this? The last 4 months. She visited twice a week. She helped with paperwork. He paused. Elena's lawyer, the one who set up the trust documents, he went to school with Sophia's husband. Claire looked at the passing street. Has Elliot said anything about the hospital visits? About Sophia being there? Vincent's hands tightened fractionally on the wheel. He stopped talking 3 weeks ago. Before the hospital visits ended? A pause. The last time he spoke before today was 2 days before Elena died. His voice was level and tight in equal measure. How was at the hospital? Sophia was there. The car was quiet. I don't know what he heard, Vincent said, or saw. He saw someone moving the flowers, Claire said. He kept watching. He kept noticing things. She paused. He's been watching Sophia for a long time, I think. Vincent pulled up behind the shop and cut the engine and sat for a moment without moving. I need the order documentation, he said. I know. She got out. He followed. Inside Rowan and Stem, in the morning quiet before the shop opened, Claire went to the filing cabinet and pulled the folder for the Moretti Memorial. She laid it on the work table under the overhead light. Vincent stood across from her and looked at it without touching it, like a man who has learned to be careful about what he puts his fingerprints on. The order form was standard. Name of the deceased, date, delivery location, specifications. At the bottom, the ordering party's name, Sophia Marino, her phone number. And below that, in the field Claire used for additional notes, her own handwriting from 2 days before the funeral. Caller specified traditional white rose arrangement, family preference. Do not substitute. Claire looked at that line. She'd written it verbatim. She always transcribed caller specifications directly, a habit for exactly this kind of dispute. Do not substitute, Vincent read. His voice was very quiet. She was specific about it. She said it was the family preference. Yes. Elena's family, who she was representing as trustee of Elena's estate. Yes. He looked at the order form for another moment. Then he pulled out his phone and took a photograph of it. He photographed every page. He did it methodically, without rushing, and when he was done, he put his phone away and stood with his hands flat on the work table and his head slightly bowed, looking at nothing. I need to make some calls, he said. Okay. I need to find out what's in those trust documents, the full version, not the summary Sophia gave me. He paused. And I need to find out what Elliot saw at the hospital. He's not ready to talk about that. I know. He looked up. I'm not going to push him. She held his gaze, checking the claim against the man making it, and found, to her slight surprise, that she believed him. There's something else, she said. Tell me. The trust document. So Sophia is trustee until Elliot turns 25. But trusteeship has conditions. Trustees can be removed for cause, negligence, self-dealing, conflict of interest. She paused. If she manipulated the memorial arrangement to influence how the family perceived Elena's wishes, to make herself look like the person who understood what the family needed, that's a stretch for a legal argument. It's a start, she said, and you haven't looked at the trust documents yet. He was quiet. Something was moving behind his eyes, a calculation she couldn't follow because she didn't have the full map of what he knew. But she could see him building something, assembling a structure from pieces he'd been carrying separately without knowing they fit together. She called herself Elena's closest confidant, he said. At the funeral, she stood up and said it in front of everyone. I heard. Elena hadn't mentioned her name to me in 2 years until she said she'd appointed her trustee. His voice had gone flat in a way that was worse than anger. I didn't push because Elena was sick, and I didn't want to argue about her choices. You trusted your sister's judgment. She trusted Sophia's. He said it like a diagnosis. Claire began refiling the documents. Find out what's in those papers, she said. All of them. The trust, the company shares, any contracts between Elena's estate and Sophia personally, any lawyer correspondence. She paused. If Sophia's been building this for a year, there'll be a paper trail. And if there isn't, then she's very good at what she does. Claire closed the filing cabinet. But she moved the flowers at her own sister-in-law's memorial while an 8-year-old boy was watching. That's not careful. That's arrogant. He looked at her. Arrogant people make paper, she said. Something shifted in his expression, not warmth exactly, more like recognition, the look of someone encountering a way of thinking they're familiar with from an unexpected direction. You're not what I expected, he said. You didn't expect anything, she said. I was just the florist. You're not just the florist. She picked up her work apron from the hook by the back door. I'm going to finish stripping those roses now. He didn't move for a moment. He was looking at her with the quality of attention she'd noticed at the funeral home. Complete, focused, the kind that didn't let much slide by. Then he nodded once. I'll be in touch, he said. About Elliot, she said. If you find out what he saw at the hospital, whatever it is, he's going to need someone to sit with while he figures out how to carry it. Not to fix it, just to sit. Are you offering? She thought about that honestly, because it was an honest question. Yes, she said, but on his timeline, not yours. Vincent absorbed that without argument, which told her something she hadn't been certain of before. He left. She heard his car pull away from behind the shop. She went back to the roses and picked up where she'd left off, hands moving in the steady rhythm of work, the familiar small pain of the thorns, the green smell of cut stems in the cold morning air. 40 minutes later, while she was finishing the last bundle, her shop phone rang. The landline, which almost no one had the number for. She answered it on the second ring. Ms. Rowan. A woman's voice, smooth, precise, with a particular quality of composure that sounded practiced. This is Sophia Marino. I believe we've met, though perhaps not been properly introduced. Claire set down the rose stem. She didn't say anything yet. I understand you've been spending time with my family, Sophia continued, with Vincent and Elliot. I think it's wonderful that Elliot has connected with someone. He's had such a difficult time. What do you want, Ms. Marino? A small pause, the pause of someone recalibrating slightly. I want to make sure we're all working toward the same thing, Elliot's well-being, the family's stability. Her voice was warm and measured. I think sometimes Vincent can be quite reactive, and I'd hate for you to be caught in the middle of a misunderstanding. What misunderstanding? He can form very strong impressions of people, very quickly. A pause with a great deal of information packed into it. I've known him for many years. His instincts about people are sometimes... She let the sentence drift. Well, I simply want to make sure you have the full picture. And what's the full picture? Vincent is not always easy to be around, Sophia said. His affection can look like generosity until it starts to look like something else. I'd hate for you to misread the situation. Claire was very still. She was listening not just to the words, but to the shape of the conversation, what it was trying to accomplish, what it was trying to move her away from, what it assumed about her. Ms. Marino, she said, did you call to warn me or to manage me? A silence, longer than the others. I'm trying to help, Sophia said. and for the first time the smoothness cracked by a fraction. A tightening, very brief, quickly recovered. Elliot told me he watched you move the flowers 3 times during the memorial service, Claire said, while the family wasn't looking. The silence that followed was absolute. He's a grieving child, Sophia said finally. Her voice had changed, not dramatically, just stripped of its warmth, like a surface cleaned down to the material underneath. He sees things that aren't there. He sees everything, Claire said. He was just out of words for a while. She hung up. She stood at the workbench for a moment with the phone in her hand. Then she picked up the rose stem she'd set down and went back to work. But her mind was running fast and cold, and she was thinking about a boy with one sock on sitting on a hallway floor, and a woman with white roses and a smile that didn't reach anything real, and a trust document she hadn't read yet, and the specific sound of a door clicking shut at the end of a phone call that had just become something it couldn't be taken back from. Whatever Sophia had hoped to accomplish with that call, she had accomplished something different. She had confirmed that Elliot's account had been specific enough to be worth denying. She had confirmed that the flowers mattered to her. And she had confirmed, without meaning to, that she knew Claire was no longer simply the florist. The roses were stripped. Claire bundled them efficiently, wrapped them in paper, labeled them. She did it all with her hands while her mind stayed on the phone call, on Sophia's voice when it had finally dropped its warmth, on the 7 words she'd spoken in the silence after Claire mentioned the flowers. He's a grieving child. He sees things that aren't there. She sees everything, Claire thought. And now Sophia knows it. She picked up her cell phone and dialed Vincent's number. He answered on the first ring, like he'd been waiting. Sophia just called my shop landline, Claire said. Number she had no business having. A pause. Dense and specific. What did she say? She warned me about you. Tried to cast doubt on Elliot's perception. Claire kept her voice even. She called it helping. The silence on Vincent's end was the kind that precedes a decision being made. Send me whatever she said that you remember, he said quietly. Exact words if you can. I'll write it down now. She paused. Vincent, she has my shop's landline. That number's not public. I know. His voice had gone very flat, very quiet. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry, she said. Just find out what else she has access to. She ended the call and stood in the back room of her shop with the smell of roses and cold morning air and something else she couldn't name. And she thought about the shape of the thing she was now standing inside and how differently it looked than it had 4 days ago, when she'd walked into a funeral home with 60 stems of white roses and a boy who hadn't found his words yet. She pulled a notepad from the drawer and started writing down everything Sophia had said, word by word, in the order she'd said it, because that was the kind of record that mattered later. And Claire Rowan had learned a long time ago that the things you write down while they're fresh are the things that save you when someone decides. The trust documents arrived at 9:14 that same morning, not to Vincent's lawyer, not through any channel that should have been possible that fast. They arrived as a photograph, 12 pages, shot on a phone, slightly angled, the way you photograph something quickly when you're not supposed to be holding it, sent from a number that Vincent's people traced in 40 minutes to a burner purchased at a convenience store in Wicker Park 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks ago. Before the funeral. Before any of this had become what it was becoming. Vincent called Claire at 9:51. She was at the front counter of the shop, helping a customer choose between 2 arrangements for a hospital visit, and she excused herself to the back room because she could hear something in the first syllable of his voice that told her the conversation wasn't going to be short. Someone sent me the trust documents, he said. Anonymous. How many pages? 12. Full document. A pause. With handwritten annotations. Whose handwriting? I don't know yet, but they're not Sophia's. He paused. Claire, there's a clause. In the trust. A removal clause for the trustee. Standard language, negligence, self-dealing, all of it. But there's a secondary clause that Sophia's lawyer added as an amendment 6 months after the original filing. What does it say? It says the trustee cannot be removed by family members of the deceased without a co-signature from the trustee's own appointed legal representative. His voice was very even. Which means Vincent Moretti can't remove Sophia Marino, not without Sophia's own lawyer agreeing to it. Claire sat down on the stool near the back workbench. She pressed her free hand flat against the wood. That's not standard, she said. No, it's not. Who approved that amendment? Elena did. The weight in those two words was enormous. Her signature is on it, and the date is 11 months ago. When she was already sick. When she already knew. His voice had gone to the flattest register she'd heard from him. When she was making decisions about Elliot's future. Claire was quiet for a moment. She was thinking about a woman who had grown rosemary on her kitchen windowsill and called forget-me-nots by name, who had been making decisions about her son's future while she was already sick, who had trusted the wrong person with the most important thing she had. She didn't know what she was signing, Claire said, or she didn't understand what the amendment meant. Or she did understand, and Sophia convinced her it was protective. He paused. Sophia is very good at explaining why things protect you. Who sent you the documents? I don't know. Someone who has access to the original filing, and who wanted you to see the amendment. Claire thought about that. That's not a random person. That's someone close to this who's been waiting for the right moment. I know. Have you talked to your own lawyer? He's looking at it now. A pause. Claire, there's something else in the annotations. Someone wrote in the margin, next to the amendment clause. Just 3 words. He stopped. She waited. Ask about Clearwater, he said. The name meant nothing to her. She said so. It meant nothing to me either, he said. Until I asked Ray. Ray, the quiet older man who had sat with Elliot while they drove to the shop that morning. Ray knew. Ray has worked for my family for 22 years. He knew Elena since she was in high school. A pause that seemed to take up more air than the pause itself warranted. He told me that 8 months before she got sick, Elena came to him. Not to me. To Ray. She was upset about something she'd found in Sophia's financial records. Something she'd seen by accident when she was helping Sophia prepare documents for a business filing. Claire's hand was still flat on the workbench. She pressed harder. What did she find? She asked. A company called Clearwater Consulting, LLC registered in Delaware, no public officers, no visible clients. He paused. Receiving quarterly payments from Elena's company, her import business. 40% of all profit distributions routed through Clearwater before going anywhere else. Her 40%. Her 40%. He was quiet for a moment. Elliot's inheritance, being routed through a company with no visible connection to anyone in the family, for at least 2 years before Elena got sick. The back room of Rowan and Stem was very quiet. Claire could hear the refrigerator unit humming, the sound of her assistant moving around in the front of the shop, the faint noise of Ashland Avenue traffic. Elena found this and came to Ray, she said. Not to you. She came to Ray because she didn't want me to handle it the way I handle things, he said. She specifically said that to him. She said, he told me her exact words. She said, if Vincent finds out, there won't be a conversation. There won't be a resolution. There'll just be an ending, and Elliot will grow up knowing his uncle ended something, and I don't want that to be his family. Claire closed her eyes. She was protecting you, she said. From yourself. A long silence. She went to Sophia instead, he said. She confronted her privately. She told Ray she was going to give Sophia a chance to correct it before she involved anyone else. Another pause. That was 9 months ago. 2 months later, Elena was diagnosed. 1 month after that, Sophia was appointed trustee. The shape of it was fully visible now. Claire saw it all at once, the whole structure of it, and it was uglier than anything she'd been building toward in her head. Sophia didn't redirect the money because she needed it, Claire said slowly. She redirected it because she could. And when Elena found out and came to her privately, instead of correcting it, Sophia made herself indispensable, Vincent said, got herself named trustee, locked in her own removal clause, and waited. Waited for Elena to die. The words sat between them on the phone line. I need to go, he said. His voice had gone completely flat. I need to make some calls. Vincent. She kept her voice steady. Don't do what Elena was afraid you'd do. A pause. I don't know what else I know how to do, he said. And then the line was quiet. She sat in the back room for a moment. Then she called Ray. He answered on the second ring, his voice careful and low, the voice of someone who had been waiting for a call they were not looking forward to. He knows, Claire said, about Clearwater. I know he knows, Ray said. He called me 20 minutes ago. Where is he now? Driving. A pause. Ms. Rowan, I've known Vincent since he was 19 years old. When he gets like this, I know, she said. Where is Elliot? Here, with me. Keep him there. She paused. Don't tell him anything. Don't let him feel anything's wrong. He already feels it, Ray said quietly. He's been sitting at the kitchen table for an hour folding paper. He's made about 20 of them. She thought about that. Elliot at the kitchen table, folding paper flowers in the silence of a house where the adults were carrying something enormous and trying to keep it out of their faces. I'm coming over, she said. He'd like that, Ray said. He asked about you this morning, first thing. She left her assistant in charge of the shop and drove to Lincoln Park in the thin October light, her hand steady on the wheel and her mind running through everything she knew about what happened when a man who had spent 30 years solving problems with controlled force ran out of patience for control. Elliot was at the kitchen table, 23 paper flowers in a loose pile at his elbow. He was working on a 24th, his hands moving carefully, and he looked up when she came in with the same sideways look he always gave her, the checking look, assessing whether she'd brought something new into the room that he needed to prepare for. She sat down across from him without preamble. Ray says you've been busy, she said. I can't get the center right, he said. He held up the flower. The outer petals were well formed, careful, but the center had collapsed slightly inward. It keeps going flat. She reached across and took it gently, showed him the fold adjustment, a quarter turn, pressure at the base before setting the center. He watched with the focused attention of someone who is using a small task to hold themselves in the world. Try, she said, handing it back. He tried. Got it right. Said it with the others. Where's Uncle Vincent? He asked. Not casually. Out, she said. Working on something. Elliot picked up another sheet of paper, began folding. He was really quiet this morning, he said. Quieter than normal quiet. Yeah. Is it about Sophia? She looked at him. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at his hands, at the paper, but his attention was completely on her answer. Some of it, she said. He nodded once. He folded another petal. Then, she used to come to the hospital a lot. At first, Mom liked it. She said it was nice to have someone who wasn't scared to just sit there. He paused, a tiny, precise fold. But then she started bringing her laptop, and she'd ask Mom to sign things. She said it was paperwork that needed to get done, and it was easier to bring it there. Another pause. Mom got tired really fast at the end. She couldn't always read things all the way through. Claire kept very still. Did you see what she was signing? She asked carefully. Sometimes. I can read pretty good. He set the flower down. Most of it I didn't understand, but one time I saw Mom's name and the word trustee and a lot of legal words. And I saw Sophia's name on almost every page. He looked up at Claire. I asked Mom what trustee meant. She said it meant someone you trust to take care of things. When was this? Claire asked. Maybe 3 months before she died. His jaw tightened. Mom told me not to worry about it. She said Sophia was helping. He picked the flower up again, held it. But she looked tired when she said it. Not just sick tired, different. Something moved through Claire's chest that had no clean name. Elliot, she said, did you ever tell anyone about what you saw at the hospital? No? Why not? He thought about it honestly, the way he thought about everything. Because after Mom died, Uncle Vincent he was trying really hard to do everything right, and I didn't want to make it bigger than he could hold. A pause. He was already holding a lot. She looked at this child across a kitchen table covered in paper flowers and felt, with a clarity that was almost physical, the specific weight of what he'd been carrying since October. Not just grief, but knowledge. The particular burden of knowing something important and choosing to protect the adults around you from it, because you could see they were already at the edge of what they could carry. 8 years old. You've been protecting him, she said. Elliot looked at his hands. She told me, he said very quietly. Who? Mom. He was still looking at his hands. Before, when she knew she was going to die. She said, your uncle is going to need protecting sometimes. Not the way you think, not from dangerous things. From himself. He paused. I didn't totally understand then, but I think I do now. The front door opened. The sound of it was specific, not the careful sound of someone entering a house, but the sound of someone who has stopped thinking about whether their entrance is loud. Claire was on her feet before she'd consciously decided to stand. Vincent came into the kitchen. I was still in the gray shirt, but something had happened to his face in the hours since she'd last seen him. Something had come loose behind his eyes that had been very carefully fastened before. He looked at Claire. He looked at Elliot. He looked at the pile of paper flowers on the table. Ray appeared in the doorway behind him, looked at Claire with an expression that asked a question and answered it at the same time. He withdrew. I found clear water, Vincent said. He wasn't talking to anyone specific, or he was talking to both of them, which was its own kind of decision. My lawyer found the registered agent. It traces to a holding company in the Cayman Islands, which traces to another company, which, if you follow it far enough, he stopped. His jaw worked. It comes back to a name. Not Sophia's name. A man named Daniel Rice, Sophia's brother-in-law. Claire had not heard that name before. Who is he? He runs a medical practice on the North Shore, general practitioner. Vincent looked at his hands on the table. He was Elena's doctor. The kitchen went very cold. Her doctor, Claire said. Her primary care physician. For 6 years. His voice was absolutely flat. He referred her to the oncologist. He managed the early treatment coordination. He was the first physician of record when her diagnosis was documented. He paused. He was also apparently receiving quarterly payments from Elena's company through Clearwater Consulting for 2 years before she was diagnosed. The structure of it snapped into place in Claire's mind all at once, and she wished it hadn't, because the shape it made was one she could not find an innocent explanation for. You think he knew before she did, Claire said. I think he knew exactly when he should have told her and made a different choice. His voice had dropped to something barely above a murmur, which was somehow worse than shouting. I think Sophia and her brother-in-law have been running a long, patient piece of work. Divert money from Elena's company through a shell, use the medical relationship to time information, get named trustee before the diagnosis goes wide, and wait for Elena to... He stopped. His throat moved. Elliot was looking at him. His paper flower was still in his hands. His face was doing something complicated and controlled. The face of someone who is hearing the confirmed shape of something they already knew in pieces. Wait for Elena to die, Elliot said quietly, finishing the sentence his uncle couldn't. Vincent looked at his nephew. Something cracked behind his eyes. Yeah, he said, very quiet. Wait for that. The silence in the kitchen was the kind that contains too much to be filled with words. Claire stood at the edge of it and let it exist, because it needed to exist, because there was no useful thing to say in the first 30 seconds after a child names the worst thing out loud and an adult hears that the child already knew. Then Vincent put his hand on the table, flat, palm down, between himself and Elliot. He didn't reach for the boy. He just put his hand there, within reach if Elliot wanted it. Elliot looked at the hand. Then he set his paper flower down carefully and put his small hand on top of his uncle's. Claire turned away and looked at the window because that moment didn't need a witness. She heard Vincent's breath change, a single irregular intake, then very controlled. When she turned back, he was looking at her. His hand was still under Elliot's. I had a meeting this morning, he said. His voice was back to controlled, but a different kind of controlled than before. Less like a wall and more like a person. With someone who does what I do, who handles things the way I handle things. He paused. I sat in that meeting and I thought about what Elena said to Ray. And I left. What do you mean you left? I mean, I stood up in the middle of a conversation about how to resolve a problem, and I walked out the door. He looked at Elliot. Because I didn't want to be someone who needed protecting from himself anymore. Elliot's fingers pressed slightly against his uncle's hand. My lawyer is filing a petition to have Sophia's trusteeship reviewed, Vincent continued, on the basis of the Clearwater payments, financial conflict of interest, breach of fiduciary duty. The amendment clause she added makes removal harder, but it doesn't make it impossible. It just means we need a judge instead of a conversation. And Rice? Claire asked. That goes to a different kind of authority. He met her eyes. The kind I'm not going to be directly involved with. My lawyer is. That's the decision I made when I left the meeting. She looked at him for a moment. She believed him. She wasn't sure she should, and she believed him anyway, which was a new kind of position for her to be in. "There's a problem," she said. "More than one. The petition. It's going to move slowly. Legal process on trust documents. We're talking months, potentially." She paused. In the meantime, Sophia is still trustee. She still controls Elliot's trust disbursements, and she knows now that Elliot talked. She knows I have the flower order documentation. She knows you're looking at the trust documents. Claire kept her voice even. "She's going to move before you do." "I know." "What does she have left to move?" Vincent looked at the table, at their hands. "Elliot," he said quietly. "She's his trustee. In an emergency, if there were grounds to question my fitness to care for him, she couldn't. She has a lawyer who writes amendment clauses into trust documents while women are too tired to read them properly." His voice was level and cold and very precise. "She can try." The room was very still. Then Elliot, who had been quiet since his uncle's last sentence, looked up from the table. He looked at Claire first, then at Vincent. His expression was the same one he'd had in the flower shop at the funeral home. The look of someone who has been reading a situation more carefully than anyone knew. "She called here yesterday," he said. "While Uncle Vincent was out, Ray answered. She asked to speak to me." Vincent went completely still. "Ray said no." "No," Elliot continued. "But after, I heard him on the phone with someone. He sounded worried." He paused. "She's already moving, isn't she?" Claire and Vincent looked at each other over the boy's head. "Yes," Claire said, "because he deserved the truth more than he deserved protection from it." Elliot nodded slowly. He picked up his paper flower from the table. He looked at it for a moment. Then he set it down again and looked at his uncle with an expression that was 8 years old in its face and considerably older in its eyes. "Then we have to move faster," he said. And somewhere across the city, in an office Claire had never seen, Sophia Marino was making a phone call to a family court attorney, and the documents she was preparing contained a claim that Vincent Moretti's known criminal associations made him an unsuitable primary guardian for a minor child, and the hearing she was requesting was scheduled for 11 days from now. And she had been planning it since the day after the funeral, and none of them had known, and now they did, and the window they had to stop it was exactly as narrow as it looked from where they were standing, which was not narrow enough to be impossible, but close enough that Claire Rowan, who had walked into this as a florist, stood in a Lincoln Park kitchen with the smell of paper and cold air and something irreversible settling around all three of them, and understood that the only way out of what was coming was through it, and that through it was going to require her to be something more than the woman who had showed up with the right flowers at the wrong funeral. 11 days. Vincent's lawyer said it like a man delivering a weather report. Neutral, professional, calibrated to not let the news become panic. 11 days before the family court hearing, Sophia's petition was already filed. The claim was what Vincent had predicted: criminal associations, unsuitable home environment, risk to the minor's welfare. She'd attached 3 exhibits. The first was a newspaper article from 6 years ago naming Vincent in connection with a federal investigation that had ultimately produced no charges. The second was a photograph of Vincent's house taken from the street, annotated with the names of 2 men standing outside it, his security, identified by Sophia's lawyer as known associates of organized crime. The third exhibit was a declaration from a licensed child psychologist named Dr. Carol Whitfield, stating that she had been retained to evaluate Elliot Moretti's emotional state and that her preliminary findings suggested the child was experiencing trauma consistent with an unstable home environment. Vincent's lawyer read all 3 exhibits aloud in the kitchen while Elliot was upstairs with Ray. His voice stayed level throughout. When he finished, the kitchen was quiet for a moment. Then Vincent said, "Who retained Whitfield?" "Sophia Marino, in her capacity as trustee." "When?" His lawyer checked his notes. "Retention agreement dated 6 days ago." 6 days ago. 1 day before Sophia had shown up at the house with white roses and a smile. She had already filed the psychologist before she came to the door. The visit hadn't been an apology or a warning or an attempt to manage Claire. It had been a provocation, designed to produce a reaction, to give Whitfield something to document. She wanted him to lock himself in the bathroom, Claire said. She said it quietly, to no one in particular, but both men looked at her. She showed up knowing it would upset him. She needed an incident. The lawyer looked at his notes. The Whitfield Declaration references an incident from 3 days ago in which the minor child barricaded himself in a bathroom for an extended period following a family visit. The word family landed in the room like something thrown. She reported it herself, Vincent said. Her declaration describes her as a concerned family member who witnessed the child's distress firsthand. Vincent stood up from the table. He walked to the window and stood there with his back to the room, very straight, his hands at his sides. Claire watched the back of his neck, the set of his shoulders, the specific quality of stillness that precedes a decision. "What do we have?" he asked. "The Clearwater financial records, the annotated trust documents, the original flower order from the Moretti Memorial." The lawyer paused. "And a florist's written account of a phone call from Sophia Marino containing what could be construed as an attempt to discredit a minor witness. Elliot's account of what he saw at the hospital and what he saw at the memorial. A child's testimony carries weight in family court, but it requires careful handling. We'd need a guardian ad litem appointed to represent his interests independently. That takes time we don't have." "Then we move without it," Vincent said. He turned around. His face was composed in a way that Claire recognized now, not the composed for intimidation expression she'd first seen at the funeral home, but something more deliberate, more costly. "What can we file before the hearing?" "A counter-petition, challenging Sophia's fitness as trustee on the basis of the Clearwater conflict of interest. We can also request an emergency stay of the hearing pending investigation of the financial irregularities." He paused. "It's not guaranteed. The judge assigned to this hearing is Patricia Ellison. She's careful. She doesn't grant emergency stays without substantial cause." "Is Clearwater substantial cause?" "It's significant, but our documentation is incomplete. We have the financial trail to the holding company. We don't yet have proof connecting Sophia personally to the Clearwater accounts." "I'm working on that," Vincent said. He looked at Claire. "There's something else." She waited. "Rice," he said. "Elena's doctor. My lawyer subpoenaed his records this morning through a civil attorney we retained for the Clearwater matter. Rice's office called back within 2 hours." He paused. "They said the records were unavailable. System migration. They'd need 10 to 14 business days." "That's not a system migration," Claire said. "No, it's not." He sat back down. His jaw was tight. "He's been tipped. Someone told him we were looking." "Sophia." "Has to be." He looked at his lawyer. "Can we compel faster production?" "We can try. Emergency motion for expedited discovery." "Again?" "Judge Ellison." Claire looked at the table, at the pile of paper flowers Elliot had left there, still stacked neatly at the edge. She thought about what it meant that a man who had spent 30 years in the kind of work that resolved problems without paperwork was now sitting in his kitchen trying to navigate family court timelines and discovery motions. She thought about Elena in a hospital bed, too tired to read documents all the way through, signing things because someone she trusted was sitting beside her explaining them. She thought about Sophia's voice on the phone, smooth, practiced, the warmth that wasn't warmth. "I need to make a call," Claire said. Both men looked at her. "There's a woman who used to bring flowers to the oncology ward at St. Michael's. She's a volunteer, been doing it for years. She knew Elena." Claire stood. "She talked to me at this funeral. She said Elena seemed frightened in the last weeks. Not of dying, of something specific. She said she'd wanted to say something to the family and hadn't known how." Vincent was very still. "You didn't mention her before." I didn't know what she was relevant to before." Claire picked up her phone. "I need 10 minutes. She went into the front room, away from the kitchen, and called a woman named Margaret Oates, who had given her a card at the funeral with the specific purposefulness of someone who has something to say and is waiting for the right person to say it to. Margaret answered on the third ring. Her voice was alert in a way that suggested she had been expecting a call, if not exactly this one. "I wondered when someone would call," she said. "Tell me what you saw," Claire said. Margaret told her. She spoke for 7 minutes in the careful, organized way of someone who has been over the information many times in their own head and has it in order. She described visiting Elena in the last month of her life. She described Sophia's presence, the laptop, the documents, the way Sophia would wait until Elena was at her most exhausted before producing anything that needed a signature. She described one specific visit, 3 weeks before Elena died, when she had arrived early and found Elena alone, Sophia having just left. And Elena had said to her, "I need someone to remember that I didn't want any of this." "What did she mean?" Claire asked. "She meant the paperwork." She said Sophia kept saying it was all to protect Elliot, and she wanted to believe that, but something felt wrong. She said, "I keep signing things I'm too tired to understand, and every time I say I want to wait and read them properly, Sophia tells me there's a deadline." Margaret paused. Then she said, and I wrote this down afterward because I knew it mattered. She said, "If anything happens that looks like I chose something I wouldn't choose, I need someone to know I didn't." Claire stood very still with the phone against her ear. "She knew," Claire said. "She suspected. She was too sick and too tired to fight it. And she was afraid that if she pushed, Sophia would disappear, and she'd be alone in there." Margaret's voice was steady, but carrying something underneath it. She thought having Sophia there, even a Sophia she didn't fully trust anymore, was better than nothing. She made a calculation. She was very sick. The calculations you make when you're very sick are not always the ones you'd make healthy. "Would you be willing to provide a written statement to a lawyer?" "I've been waiting to be asked," Margaret said. "I have the notes I wrote afterward, dated. I have them in a folder." Claire went back to the kitchen. She looked at Vincent. "Margaret Oates," she said, "Elena's hospital volunteer. She has written contemporaneous notes from a conversation with Elena 3 weeks before she died. Elena told her she was signing documents she didn't understand under time pressure." She paused. "She said she needed someone to know that if anything looked like her choice, it wasn't." The lawyer's pen was already moving. Vincent looked at Claire for a long moment. Something moved through his expression that wasn't gratitude exactly. It was something bigger and less comfortable than gratitude. The look of a man who is realizing that the problem he's been trying to solve with force has been unlocking itself through a set of tools he doesn't own. "Get her in," he said to his lawyer. "Today?" "Today." What followed was 9 days of the most concentrated, grinding, exhausting work Claire had participated in since the year she'd opened her shop and run the business on 4 hours of sleep and terror. It didn't look like the movies. There were no dramatic moments in courtrooms with galleries of shocked onlookers. There were conference rooms and filing deadlines and phone calls at 11 at night, and a lawyer who wore the same suit 3 days running, and a man named Vincent Moretti, who sat at a kitchen table every morning before anyone else was up, learning to fold paper flowers with the grim, committed focus of someone learning a language he should have started earlier. Elliot taught him. That part happened naturally, in the margins of the days, in the half hours between phone calls and document reviews, when the house needed to be something other than a war room. Elliot would sit across from Vincent at the kitchen table and fold in silence, and occasionally reach across and adjust Vincent's hands without comment. Vincent submitted to the corrections with a patience that Claire could see was costing him something, and the cost of it was also, she thought, changing something. She was at the house more than she was at the shop. She'd left her assistant in charge with a raise she'd negotiated over the phone in the parking lot and a promise to make it permanent if the shop was still standing in 2 weeks. She drove back to Rowan and Stem each morning to open and check inventory and sign off on deliveries, and drove back to Lincoln Park by noon. It was inefficient and expensive, and she did it anyway because the alternative was leaving Elliot in a house full of adults who were all performing competence, while underneath they were terrified, and she had a talent for sitting in a room without performing anything. On day 4, Sophia's lawyer made a countermove. He filed a supplemental declaration from Whitfield expanding her preliminary findings. The new material claimed that Elliot had exhibited attachment difficulties with his uncle, specifically pointing to the bathroom incident as evidence of the child's insecurity in his home environment. It also noted that Elliot had recently formed an attachment to an adult outside the family, a local business owner, which Whitfield characterized as a potential sign of unmet emotional needs within the household. Claire read the declaration at the kitchen table. The phrase local business owner was so precisely chosen to sound both accurate and diminishing that she almost admired it. "She's building a case that I'm a symptom," she said. "That's exactly what she's doing," Vincent's lawyer agreed. "If the judge sees your presence as evidence of instability rather than support, then we need Elliot's voice," Claire said. "His actual voice, a guardian ad litem." "We requested one. Judge Ellison approved the appointment this morning." He paused. "Dr. Irene Voss. She has a good reputation. She'll want to interview Elliot independently." Vincent looked at Claire. He won't talk to a stranger. He talked to me, Claire said, 4 days after we met. You're not a stranger to him anymore. Dr. Voss will come to the house. Elliot sets the terms. If he wants me in the room, I'll be there. If he wants me outside, I'll be outside. She paused. He gets to decide. That's the whole point. Vincent put down the paper flower he'd been working on. He looked at it. The center was better than last week. It wasn't collapsing anymore. He'd been practicing at 5 in the morning when the house was quiet, she'd found out from Ray, who found it equal parts baffling and moving. She's going to put Whitfield on the stand, he said. Then we put Margaret on the stand. Whitfield is credentialed, licensed. She's going to sound like an expert, and Margaret is going to sound like a volunteer. Margaret has dated contemporaneous notes of a conversation with Elena, expressing that she was signing documents under duress. Claire kept her voice even. Whitfield has a retention agreement from Sophia Marino and a declaration based on an incident that Sophia herself engineered. She paused. Let the judge sort credentials from content. On day 6, Rice's lawyer produced the medical records. Not willingly, the expedited discovery motion had been granted, which told Claire that Judge Ellison was paying attention to the Clearwater angle even if she hadn't granted the stay. The records were thick and technical and mostly incomprehensible to Claire, but Vincent's lawyer brought in a medical consultant who went through them in 4 hours and came out of the back room looking the specific shade of pale that means you have found exactly what you were afraid of finding. Elena's diagnosis had been documented in Rice's records on a date 14 months before she died. Standard enough. But the records also contained internal notes, physician notes, the kind that aren't usually part of the formal documentation. And in those notes, there was a reference to a conversation with a family member prior to the patient being informed of her diagnosis. The family member was not identified by name in the note, but the note was dated 2 days before Elena's own account of when Rice had told her, 2 days during which someone else already knew. He told Sophia before he told Elena, Claire said. She was reading over the lawyer's shoulder, her hand on the back of his chair to steady herself. We can't prove it from this alone, the lawyer said. The family member isn't named. Sophia is the only family member who had a documented relationship with Rice at that point. She paused. Through Clearwater. It's circumstantial. It's enough to ask the question in front of a judge. On day 8, Elliot met with Dr. Voss. Claire sat in the kitchen while it happened in the living room. She could hear the low sound of voices but not the words, which was the right amount of information. She drank 3 cups of coffee and built a paper flower that was better than anything she'd done in years, because she had something to do with her hands that required the kind of focus that pushes everything else to the edges. Ray sat across from her and didn't say anything, which was what she needed. After 40 minutes, the voices stopped. Dr. Voss came to the kitchen doorway. She was a compact woman in her 50s with the specific kind of tired eyes that come from spending decades listening carefully to things that are hard to hear. He's a remarkable kid, she said. Yes, Claire said. He asked me to tell you he wants you to come in. Claire went in. Elliot was on the couch with his knees drawn up, holding a paper flower, one of the ones from the kitchen table. Dr. Voss sat in the chair across from him. She looked at Claire with a question. I can step back out, Claire said to Elliot. No, he said. You should hear this too. He talked for 20 minutes. He talked about the hospital, about what he'd seen, about Sophia and the documents and the way his mother looked when she signed things. He talked about the flowers at the memorial. He talked about what his mother had told him, about protecting Vincent from himself. He talked slowly and carefully and with a precision that was extraordinary, and Dr. Voss wrote notes without interrupting him, and Claire sat on the end of the couch and did not perform anything. When he finished, the room was quiet. Is that enough? Elliot asked Dr. Voss. Not anxiously, with the purposeful pragmatism of someone who wants to know if the job got done. It's more than enough, she said. Day 9, the night before the hearing. Vincent found Claire in the back room of the house, where someone had set up a folding table covered in documents that she'd been going through for the past 2 hours. It was past midnight. The house was quiet. Ray had gone home. Elliot was asleep. Vincent sat down across from her. He looked like a man who had been awake for most of a week and had stopped pretending otherwise. His shirt was wrinkled, his jaw unshaved, his eyes carrying a weight that wasn't going to lift regardless of how tomorrow went. He put a paper flower on the table between them. It was good. The center held, the petals were even, the whole thing had a shape that you could recognize as intentional. Ray found it this morning, he said. From the first time I tried. He kept it. Claire looked at the early attempt. Lopsided, the center collapsed, one petal shorter than the others. She looked at the one he'd just put on the table. You've been practicing at 5 in the morning, she said. Elliot told you. Ray did. He almost smiled. It didn't quite make it, but it came closer than she'd seen before. I'm going to lose things tomorrow, he said. Whatever the judge decides. There are going to be things I can't keep. Probably. The business, the way I've been running it, the infrastructure. He said the word carefully, the way you say something when you're choosing not to say something more specific. I've been talking to people about changing the infrastructure. She looked at him. Quietly? As quietly as possible. He paused. Elena would have said it wasn't enough. She'd have been right. What does Elliot need it to be? He was quiet for a moment. Different from what I am. You're already different from what you were 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks is not a track record. No, she said, but it's a start. He looked at the 2 flowers on the table. His hands were flat on either side of them, the way he'd placed them on the kitchen table 11 days ago when Elliot had put his small hand on top. Whatever happens tomorrow, he said, I need you to know something. She waited. I came back to the shop after the funeral, not because of Elliot. I came back because of you. He said it without decoration, without the kind of delivery that tries to make the admission cost less. I didn't have a name for it. I still mostly don't. But I need you to know it was a choice, not a calculation. Claire looked at the paper flower between them. The good one, the one he'd made after 9 days of practicing at 5 in the morning when the house was quiet. I know. No, she'd said. That's why I'm still here. The morning of the hearing arrived gray and cold, the kind of October morning that has given up pretending it might get warm. Claire drove to the courthouse with Vincent in the black car, both of them quiet. Elliot stayed home with Ray, which had been the plan, and which Elliot had accepted without argument, though he had pressed a paper flower into Claire's hand before she left and said only, for if you need something to hold. She had it in her jacket pocket. The courtroom was smaller than she'd expected. A family courtroom, not a drama, fluorescent light and wood veneer, and a bailiff who looked like he'd rather be anywhere. Sophia was already seated at the petitioner's table when they came in. She was in a charcoal suit, very controlled, her lawyer beside her. She looked at Vincent when he entered, and her expression did something complex and rapid before settling into the smooth composure she wore the way other people wore armor. She looked at Claire, and the smoothness flickered. Judge Patricia Ellison came in at 9:02. She was in her 60s, silver-haired, with the specific economy of movement of someone who has been doing this long enough that they've eliminated everything unnecessary. She sat. She looked at both tables with an evenness that gave nothing away. We're here on the petition of Sophia Marino in her capacity as trustee, she said, and the counter-petition of Vincent Moretti. I've reviewed the pre-hearing submissions. She set down the folder. Before we begin, I want to say something to both parties. She looked at Sophia's table first, then at Vincent's. I have been a family court judge for 19 years, she said. I have never, in 19 years, seen a guardian ad litem's preliminary report reference a child's father figure folding paper flowers at 5 in the morning as evidence of suitability. So we are already in unusual territory. She paused, and the pause was precise and weighted. I have also rarely seen a trustee's own retained psychologist produce a report that, on close reading, describes an incident the trustee personally engineered. She looked at Sophia's lawyer. You're going to want to address that. Sophia's lawyer stood. How was good? Controlled, experienced, the kind of good that knows when to cut losses. Your Honor, the Whitfield Declaration will be subject to extensive examination, the judge said. Sit down. He sat. The first 2 hours were documentation. Clearwater, the financial records, the annotated trust amendment. Claire sat behind Vincent and his lawyer and watched Sophia's face across the aisle as each exhibit was entered. The composure held, but it held differently, like something being gripped rather than something naturally present. Margaret Oates testified for 40 minutes. She read from her notes directly, dated in her own handwriting, the specific words Elena had used. I need someone to remember I didn't want any of this. Sophia's lawyer cross-examined her for 12 minutes and accomplished nothing except making the jury. There was no jury, only the judge, but Claire thought of it that way, more certain that Margaret was telling the truth. The medical records came in through the consultant, the family member notation, the 2-day gap. Sophia's lawyer objected 4 times. Judge Ellison overruled 3 of the 4 objections, and on the 4th said, with a measured precision that was somehow more cutting than raised volume, "Counselor, I'm going to need you to let this breathe." Then Sophia's lawyer made his move. He called Whitfield. She was polished and credentialed and testified in the careful, qualified language of professional expertise. She described her findings. She described the bathroom incident. She described Elliot's attachment to a non-family adult as clinically significant. She was on the stand for 30 minutes, and she was good at it. And when Sophia's lawyer sat down, he had reconstructed some of what the morning had cost them. Vincent's lawyer stood. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Dr. Whitfield, when were you retained by Ms. Marino?" 6 days before the petition was filed. "And your preliminary findings, the ones in the declaration, are they based on direct evaluation of Elliot Moretti?" A pause. "They're based on direct evaluation, yes or no?" "They're based on reported observations, and you have never met Elliot Moretti." The courtroom went very still. "My findings are based on, you have never spoken to him. You have never been in the same room with him. Your entire declaration is based on secondhand account from the woman who retained and paid you." He paused. "Is that accurate?" Whitfield's composure held, but it cost something visible. The field of psychological assessment allows for, "Is that accurate?" "Yes," she said. "That is accurate." Vincent's lawyer sat down. The judge made a note. It was a brief note, written quickly, and Claire could not see what it said, but she could see from the quality of the judge's expression what category it fell into. Then Sophia's lawyer did something Claire had not anticipated. He stood and said, "Your Honor, the petitioner would like to make a brief statement." The judge looked at Sophia. "Ms. Marino." Sophia stood. She was still composed. But the composition had changed quality. It was no longer armor. It was something more fragile, something being worn against an internal pressure that was starting to show through at the seams. "I loved Elena Moretti," she said. "Whatever is being alleged about Clearwater or about the trust amendment, I want this court to know that my primary concern has always been Elliot's welfare." "Ms. Marino," her lawyer started. "The money—" She paused. "The Clearwater arrangement was established with Elena's knowledge. In the beginning, she agreed to it. It was a financial structure that benefited both of us." She stopped. Her jaw worked. "Things became more complicated than I anticipated." The room went very quiet. Her own lawyer had his hand on her arm. She ignored it. "Elena found out it had become something different than what she'd agreed to," Sophia continued. "And She stopped again. The composure was cracking now, not dramatically but unmistakably, the way ice cracks in a specific pattern from the center outward. "I should have corrected it. When she came to me, I should have corrected it instead of Ms. Marino," her lawyer said sharply. "I strongly advise, instead of making sure I was protected first." She said it quietly. She was looking at the judge, not at Vincent, not at Claire, not at the room. "I made sure I was protected first, and Elena was—" Her voice caught on something. She was already so tired. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Judge Ellison looked at Sophia for a long moment. Then she looked at her notes. Then she looked at both tables. "We're going to take a 30-minute recess," she said. "When we come back, I'm going to hear closing arguments, and then I'm going to rule." She left the bench. The bailiff called the room to order. Sophia sat down and her lawyer leaned immediately toward her, his voice low and urgent, and she sat through it with a stillness that was the opposite of composure, the stillness of someone who has just set down something very heavy and doesn't yet know what to do with their empty hands. Vincent turned to look at Claire. His face was doing the complicated thing it did when he was feeling something he didn't have a compartment for. Claire put her hand in her jacket pocket and felt the paper flower Elliot had given her that morning, the petals slightly crushed from an hour of holding, the center still intact. She pressed it between her fingers and waited for the judge to come back. And the 30 minutes stretched out long and specific, and somewhere across the city, a boy was folding paper at a kitchen table, and the weight of the next 30 minutes sat on everyone in that room, like something that had been building since October, since a funeral home and 60 white roses, and a child who had run out of words, and a woman who had shown up with better materials and somehow ended up here, in a family courtroom, with a crushed paper flower in her pocket, and everything that mattered to three people balanced on the careful, slow return of a judge who had been doing this for 19 years and had seen, apparently, nothing quite like this before. Judge Ellison came back at exactly 30 minutes. She came through the side door at the precise half-hour mark, which told Claire something about the kind of person she was. Not the kind who makes you wait to feel the weight of what's coming, but the kind who respects that waiting is its own cost and doesn't add to it unnecessarily. She sat. She arranged her papers with the same economy of movement she'd brought to everything else. She looked at both tables once, quickly, and then looked at her notes. "I'm not going to make this longer than it needs to be," she said. "Both parties have been through enough." Sophia's lawyer sat very straight. Vincent's lawyer had his pen in his hand and wasn't writing anything. "The petition filed by Miss Marino in her capacity as trustee is denied," Judge Ellison said. "The evidence submitted in support of that petition, specifically the Whitfield Declaration, is based entirely on second-hand account from a retained party and carries no independent evidentiary weight. The incident cited as evidence of an unstable home environment was, based on the record before me, precipitated by the petitioner herself." She paused. "I want to be precise about that finding, because I find it significant. The petitioner engineered the very incident she then used as evidence." Sophia did not move. Her lawyer put his hand briefly on her arm and then removed it. "The counterpetition submitted by Mr. Moretti is granted in part," the judge continued. "I am ordering an immediate review of the Clearwater Consulting arrangement and its relationship to the trust established for Elliot Moretti. The financial documentation submitted suggests a pattern of self-dealing that, at minimum, constitutes a serious conflict of interest for the trustee." She looked up. "At maximum, it constitutes something considerably more serious, and I am referring the Clearwater matter and the associated medical records to the state's attorney's office for review." The room absorbed that quietly. "Regarding the trusteeship itself," Judge Ellison said, "Miss Marino, you made a statement before the recess. I want to address it directly." She looked at Sophia. "You said you should have corrected things when Elena Moretti came to you. I believe you meant that. I also believe it does not undo what wasn't corrected. A trustee who prioritizes their own protection over the interests of a vulnerable person in their care, a dying woman in this instance, is not a trustee who should continue in that role." She paused. "I am removing you as trustee of the Elliot Moretti Trust, effective immediately. I am appointing a court-supervised independent trustee to manage the trust assets pending the Clearwater investigation." She made 2 notes. Then she set her pen down. "Mr. Moretti," she said, "you are Elliot's legal guardian. That is not in dispute and was never, on the merits of the evidence before me, seriously in question. What I'm going to say to you is not a legal finding. It is an observation from someone who has been doing this work for a long time." She looked at him steadily. "The guardian ad litem's report on this child is one of the most precise documents I have read in recent memory. Dr. Voss describes a boy who has been watching adults perform competence and grief and authority while carrying more knowledge than any of them realized, and who made a decision, at 8 years old, to protect the people around him from what he knew. That kind of child needs a specific kind of adult." She paused. "The report also notes, in Dr. Voss's own words, that in the past 11 days this child has begun speaking more freely, sleeping better, and, I'm quoting directly, has taught his uncle to fold paper flowers, which the uncle now practices before dawn, apparently in an effort to get better at it." She looked at Vincent, and for one moment something moved through her judicial composure that was almost, not quite, but almost, warmth. "I don't know what that's worth in a courtroom. I know what it's worth." She gathered her papers. "We're adjourned." The bailiff called it. Everyone stood. The judge left. Claire stayed seated for a moment. Around her the room shifted into the specific motion of things concluding, lawyers gathering papers, a clerk moving toward the bench, the particular restlessness of people who have been very still for a long time and are now allowed to move again. Vincent turned around from the table in front of her. His face was doing something she'd seen before, the complicated thing, but it was different now. Less compressed, less like something being held under pressure, and more like something that had just been set down. He didn't say anything. She didn't either. It wasn't that kind of moment. His lawyer was talking to him quietly. She heard fragments, next steps, the state's attorney referral, the independent trustee appointment, what it would mean for the Clearwater investigation, and the timeline. Vincent listened and answered in short, specific words and kept looking at Claire over his lawyer's shoulder in a way that was not asking for anything, just maintaining a point of contact, the way you keep a hand on a wall in the dark, not because you can't stand, but because it helps. Sophia was still at the petitioner's table when Claire stood and moved toward the aisle. Her lawyer had left to speak to the clerk. She was alone, and for the first time since Claire had encountered her, she looked it. The charcoal suit was still immaculate, her posture still controlled, but the smoothness she'd worn like a professional surface had been removed by the morning's proceedings. And what was underneath it was not the calculation Claire had expected. It was something older and more ordinary. Exhaustion. The specific, heavy exhaustion of someone who has been maintaining something difficult for a very long time and has just been told they can stop, though not in the way they would have chosen. Claire stopped at the end of the aisle. She wasn't sure why. She looked at Sophia and Sophia looked back at her, and neither of them said anything for a moment. "She talked to you," Sophia said finally. Not hostile, just flat, with a kind of worn accuracy. "Elena," at the end. "Through someone who cared about her," Claire said. "She talked to a stranger before she talked to me." Sophia looked at the table in front of her. "We'd known each other for 14 years. She was afraid of you by then." "I know." Her voice was very quiet. She wasn't performing anything. It was the most honest Claire had heard her. "I didn't start out trying to be someone to be afraid of." She paused. "I started out actually trying to help." "When did it become—" "I can't always find the exact moment it became something else." Claire looked at her. She thought about what it meant to start somewhere reasonable and end somewhere not, the long, slow drift of it, the way each individual step seems justifiable right up until you look back from the end and can see the whole distance you've traveled. "I don't know if that makes it better or worse," Claire said. "Worse," Sophia said. "Simply, it makes it worse. If I'd started out intending this, at least I'd know what I am." Claire didn't have an answer for that. She left it where it was and walked out of the courtroom into the hallway, where the fluorescent light was different from inside, brighter, more institutional, stripping everything down to its functional components. Vincent found her there 2 minutes later. His lawyer had gone ahead to make calls. He stood in the hallway beside her without the bodyguard quality, without the pulled center of gravity weight he'd carried at the funeral home. He looked like a man who was tired in a way that sleep couldn't address, which was a different kind of tired than he'd been 2 weeks ago. "How's Elliot going to be with this?" he asked. "He's going to want to know what happened." "All of it?" "Enough of it to understand that the things he saw were real and are being addressed." She paused. "He already knew most of it. You're not going to shock him." "And Sophia?" "He'll want to understand that too. Eventually." She looked at the hallway ahead of them. "Not today." Vincent was quiet for a moment. "I called someone this morning, before the hearing." He said it without preamble, looking at the floor. "About the business. About the infrastructure I mentioned." He paused. "There's a federal attorney I've had contact with before. In a different context. I told him I wanted to talk about what a more formal disengagement process might look like." Claire looked at him. "It's going to take time," he said, "and it's going to cost things I can't entirely predict. And there's no version of it where everything I've done for 30 years gets resolved cleanly." He said the word with the awareness of how insufficient it was. "But Elliot said his mother told him I needed protecting from myself. And I think—" He stopped. "I think the version of protecting myself from myself is making it so he doesn't grow up watching me be someone who should need it." She held his gaze. She let the claim sit and breathe rather than immediately assessing it, because it was the kind of claim that deserved that. "That's the hardest thing you could do," she said. "I know." A pause. "That's how I know it's right." They drove back to Lincoln Park in the black car, mostly quiet, the city moving past the windows in its particular October way, gray and specific, the trees half stripped of leaves and the sidewalks full of the particular motion of people who have places to be and are working hard at getting there. Ray opened the front door before they reached it. He looked at Vincent's face, and his own face did something that didn't need words. A release of tension so long held it changed his whole posture. Elliot was at the kitchen table. He had paper in front of him, but he wasn't folding. He was sitting very straight, his hands flat on the table, and he turned when they came in with the complete, immediate attention of someone who has been waiting and has been careful not to let the waiting become frantic. He looked at Vincent. He looked at Claire. "Well," he said. "She's not the trustee anymore," Vincent said. Elliot absorbed this. His hands pressed slightly against the table. "And you?" "I'm still here." A beat. Then Elliot looked at the table, at his hands, and something in his posture changed. Not dramatically, not the way big things change in movies, but the way real things change, which is subtly and in the specific quality of a breath released. "Okay," he said. He picked up a sheet of paper and started folding. Vincent sat down across from him without being asked. He reached for a sheet of paper. His hands had gotten better. The folds were cleaner now, the pressure more even, the center no longer collapsing. He started working, and for a moment there was no sound in the kitchen except the small, specific sound of paper being shaped. Claire made coffee. She did it without asking if anyone wanted any, because they did, and the making of it gave her hands something to do while the kitchen settled around the two of them at the table. Ray stood in the doorway for a moment, watching, then quietly withdrew. She brought the coffee and sat at the end of the table and held her mug and watched Elliot correct one of Vincent's folds without comment, just reached across and adjusted the angle, then returned to his own. Vincent adjusted, kept going. "She admitted it," Claire said to Elliot, when the silence had settled enough. "In the courtroom. Sophia. She said she should have done things differently." Elliot didn't look up from his folding. "Did she cry?" "No." He nodded slowly. "That's more real," he said. "When people cry, they're usually just sorry they got caught." Claire looked at him. Vincent looked at him. He kept folding. "Your mom said that?" Vincent asked. "No," Elliot said. "I figured it out." A pause. "But she probably would have said it." The afternoon passed in that kitchen in a way that afternoons rarely pass, slowly and with presence in it. Vincent made phone calls from the back room, 2 of them, brief and specific, and came back looking like someone who has made decisions that cost something and is not pretending they don't. Elliot ate a sandwich without being asked and finished it without ceremony. Claire called her shop and talked to her assistant for 12 minutes and learned that the delivery had gone fine, and there were 3 new orders and 1 customer complaint about stems being too short, which was a legitimate complaint she would address on Monday. Normal things. The particular relief of normal things after abnormal ones. In the late afternoon, when the light had gone golden and thin through the kitchen window, Elliot looked up from a completed flower and said, "I want to go to the shop. Rowan and stem." Claire looked at him. "When?" "Now." She glanced at Vincent, who said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. They went in Claire's van, all 3 of them, Vincent in the passenger seat with his knees slightly compressed by the dash in a way he didn't complain about. Elliot sat in the back on a stack of floral foam wrapped in plastic, which was not a seat, but which he seemed to find acceptable. Rowan and Stem was closed by the time they got there, the closed sign on the door, her assistant gone. Claire unlocked it, and the 3 of them went into the smell of eucalyptus and cold water, and the specific green darkness of a space where living things are stored. She turned on the backroom lights. The front of the shop was lit only by the last of the afternoon through the window, which was enough. Elliot walked through the front room slowly, looking at things. The arrangements in the case, the loose stems in buckets, the small paper daisies Claire kept in a jar on the counter, a habit she'd started after the funeral, folding them in quiet moments, keeping a supply for customers who needed something to hold while they thought about what they wanted. He stopped at the jar. He looked at the paper daisies for a moment. Then he reached into his jacket pocket, the same gesture Claire had watched him make at the memorial, the same pocket, and took out a small square of folded paper. He unfolded it with care. It was his mother's paper flower, the unfinished one he'd carried since she died, the one he'd placed at the memorial and apparently retrieved afterward. 1 petal still uncompleted, the fold on the left side slightly different from the right. He set it on the counter beside the jar of Claire's finished daisies. He looked at them for a long time. Then he took one of Claire's finished daisies from the jar and placed it beside his mother's unfinished one, close but not touching, the same way Claire had done at the funeral home. He looked at the 3 things together: Elena's unfinished flower, Claire's finished one, the jar holding the rest. Both, he said quietly. Claire looked at him. Both what? He thought about how to say it. His hands were in his jacket pockets now, and he was looking at the flowers with the concentrated seriousness he applied to everything. The one that's done and the one that isn't, he said. They can both be there. You don't have to finish it to put it somewhere it matters. He paused. She didn't finish it. That doesn't mean it's less. The shop was very quiet. Vincent was standing near the door, and he was looking at his nephew, and his face was doing the complicated thing, but it was the most open version of it Claire had seen. No compression, no controlled performance of control, just a man looking at a child and feeling the full weight of what he was looking at. No, Claire said. It doesn't. Elliot nodded once, satisfied, and moved on to look at the rest of the shop. Claire stood at the counter. She looked at Elena's unfinished paper flower beside the finished one, and she thought about what Elliot had just said with the precision that 8-year-olds sometimes achieve before the world teaches them that imprecision is easier. The unfinished thing and the finished one together, both of them real, both of them present. She felt Vincent beside her before she heard him move. He stopped at the counter and looked at the flowers. She was working on something like this, he said, when she was first sick. She learned to fold from a YouTube video. She was terrible at it. He paused. She said she wanted to make one for Elliot, something he could keep. He looked at the unfinished flower. She got as far as she got. He's been keeping it, Claire said. I know. His voice was quiet. I didn't know he had it. I thought it was lost. He was still for a moment. He's been carrying it in his pocket for 2 months. The particular weight of that sat in the air between them. He's going to be okay, Claire said. Not as reassurance. She wasn't in the habit of reassurance for its own sake. As an assessment. He's already mostly okay. He just needed the people around him to stop being so loud with their fear that he couldn't find his own words in it. I was loud, Vincent said. Yes, I'm trying to be less loud. I know. She paused. It's working. He turned to look at her. She looked back. The afternoon light through the front windows was doing something specific to the room, the particular amber quality of late October light that makes everything look like it's about to become a memory. And she was aware of that quality and also aware that it was just light, that the moment was just a moment, that the two of them were just two people standing in a flower shop at the end of something long and hard, looking at each other across the counter. I want to come back here, he said. Not because of a crisis, not because Elliot needs something, or I need something managed. Just, he stopped, tried again. I want to come back and learn to do this right. He gestured at the shop, the flowers, the counter, the jar of paper daisies, the ordinary working life of a place that made things for people who were grieving or celebrating or just trying to say something they couldn't say without help. She looked at him for a long moment, doing the same thing she'd done at the kitchen table the night before the hearing, not immediately assessing, letting it breathe. You can come back, she said. But you come in through the front door like anyone else. You don't bring the 2 large men who stand outside and make Gerald nervous. He almost smiled again. This time it made it, barely. A brief, specific thing. Okay, he said. 3 weeks later, on a Saturday morning in November, Vincent Moretti walked into Rowan & Stem through the front door like anyone else. I was wearing a jacket that was slightly less expensive looking than usual, and he was alone. And he held the door for an elderly woman who was leaving with a small arrangement of chrysanthemums, and she thanked him, and he said, You're welcome, with the slightly awkward quality of a man who is learning to mean it. He sat in one of the mismatched chairs near the window while Claire finished with a customer. He didn't take out his phone. He looked at the shop with the particular attention he applied to things he was genuinely trying to understand. When the customer left, Claire brought 2 cups of coffee and sat across from him. How's Elliot? She asked. Talking, he said. More every day. Yesterday he told me my paper flower petals are uneven. He paused. He demonstrated with 3 different examples. He's right. Your left petals still run short. I know. I've been trying to correct it. Show me. He pulled a sheet of paper from his jacket pocket. She noticed he'd started carrying paper, the same way Elliot did, and began folding. She watched his hands. He was better than he'd been. The right side was clean and controlled. The left side still had a tendency to pull inward on the final fold. She reached across and adjusted his hand at the last fold. The pressure point, the quarter turn. He held the position and completed it. The petal was even. He looked at it. "Huh," he said. "You were forcing it," she said. "The left side. You were pressing harder because you knew it was wrong, and pressing harder made it worse." He looked at the flower, then at her. "That's probably applicable to other things." "Probably." He finished the flower, set it on the table between the coffee cups. It was the best one she'd seen from him. Not perfect, the center could be tighter, but real. The kind of thing you'd recognize as a flower without being told. "The federal attorney," he said. "We've been talking." "How is that going?" "Long," he said. "It's going to be very long. And there are going to be things that come out that I'd rather not have out." He paused. "I'm going ahead with it." "Because of Elliot?" "Partly." He turned the coffee cup in his hands. "Partly because I've been building something for 30 years that I kept telling myself was necessary. And I've spent the last month sitting at a kitchen table with a child who keeps correcting my paper flowers. And I think I've been wrong about what's necessary." He said it simply, not dramatically, with the flatness of something that has been examined from many angles and arrived at through work rather than revelation. She didn't tell him he was right. He didn't need that from her. She picked up her coffee and drank it, and the shop was quiet around them in the good way, the way it got when the morning was just starting and the day's work was in front of her, and nothing had gone wrong yet. "The Clearwater investigation," she said. "Margaret?" "She gave a formal statement to the state's attorney last week. The investigation is open." He paused. "Rice has retained a criminal defense attorney." "And Sophia?" He was quiet for a moment. "She called me," he said. "Last week. I answered because I didn't recognize the number. She was calling from someone else's phone." Claire waited. "She asked about Elliot," he said. "She asked if he was okay." A pause. "I told her he was talking more." Another pause. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Tell him I'm sorry. Not for getting caught. Tell him I'm actually sorry." And then she hung up. The shop was very still. "Did you tell him?" Claire asked. "I did." He looked at the paper flower on the table. He was quiet for a while. Then he said, "Okay, just that," and went back to what he was doing. He paused. "I think that's the right amount of response." "I think so too." The bell above the front door rang and a customer came in. A young woman with a bundled coat and the specific expression of someone who needs flowers but isn't sure what kind. Claire stood and went to help her, and Vincent sat in the mismatched chair by the window with his coffee and his paper flower and the particular quality of a man who is learning what it feels like to be in a place without an agenda. The customer wanted something for her mother's birthday. Not too formal, not too casual, something that said, "I'm thinking of you," without trying too hard. Claire walked her through the options, asking a few questions, listening more than she talked. She built an arrangement of small sunflowers and rosemary, and something blue that was almost but not quite forget-me-nots, and the young woman's face did the thing that faces do when someone has understood what they were trying to say. She paid and left. Claire came back to find that Vincent had folded a second flower while she was working. He set it beside the first one. "Better?" he asked. She looked. "Yes. Left petal's still slightly short." "I know." He looked at it without frustration, which was its own kind of progress. "I'll keep working on it." She sat back down. The morning light through the window had shifted to something cleaner and less amber, the full November light that had no nostalgia in it, just clarity. A month after the hearing, on the anniversary of Elena's memorial, which Claire had only realized was the anniversary when Ray mentioned it quietly, as they were planning Elliot's 8th birthday gathering, which fell 4 days later, Elliot asked to go to the place where his mother was buried. They went on a Tuesday morning, Vincent and Elliot and Claire, in the black car that Vincent still had but had begun to drive himself more often. The cemetery was on the north side, modest for the kind of family Elena had married into, which was entirely consistent with what Claire now knew about her. They brought flowers. Real ones and paper ones both, Claire's suggestion, which Elliot had approved immediately, and Vincent had accepted without the slight uncertainty he might have shown a month ago. Wild daisies, which were out of season and had to be sourced from a supplier 2 counties over at some expense. Rosemary from the pot that Elliot had started growing on his bedroom windowsill. He'd asked for the seeds 3 weeks after the hearing, and Ray had found them at a garden center, and the pot now sat in the south window of his room where it got the most light. And paper flowers. 3 of them. 1 from each of them. They stood at the grave in the November cold, which was the particular cold of a day that has decided to be winter and isn't apologizing about it. Elliot had his jacket zipped to his chin and his hands in his pockets. He stood straight and looked at his mother's name on the stone with an expression that was not performing anything, not performing grief, not performing composure, just being present in the specific, costly way of someone who has learned that being present is the only honest option. He took the flowers out of his pocket, the daisy, the rosemary sprig, his paper flower, which was the most precise thing he'd ever made, 12 petals even, the center exactly right. He placed them at the base of the stone with the same ceremonial care he'd brought to the funeral home, the same deliberate intention. Then he reached into his other pocket and took out his mother's unfinished paper flower. He held it for a moment, looking at it. The uncompleted petal, the fold on the left side that was different from the right. He placed it beside his own finished flower. The 2 of them together in the cold November air, the finished and the unfinished, the one he'd carried in his pocket for 3 months and the one he'd made himself. Both, Vincent said quietly. He'd been watching Elliot, and now he was looking at the flowers. Both, Elliot agreed. Claire set her paper flower beside theirs. She stepped back and gave the 2 of them the space that the moment required, which was not much space but needed to be deliberate. She stood a few feet back and looked at the 3 paper flowers, and the real ones around them, and the cold gray sky above the cemetery, and thought about what it cost to arrive here. The specific accumulated cost of 2 months of phone calls and court documents, and 5 in the morning paper folding, and an 8-year-old boy with a pocket full of things he was keeping safe. It hadn't been clean. It hadn't been easy. The investigation into Clearwater was ongoing and would be for months. The business changes Vincent was making were slow and complicated and would surface things he'd spent years keeping beneath the surface. Elliot was better, but not finished, and finished wasn't the right word anyway. He was 9 days from his 9th birthday, and he had lost his mother and been failed by people he should have been able to trust, and none of that resolved. It just became part of what he carried forward. But he was folding paper. He was growing rosemary. He had started talking to a boy at school named Marcus, who collected bottle caps and who had called the house twice that week, and both times Elliot had answered the phone himself, which Vincent had mentioned to Claire with the specific quality of someone reporting a significant development while trying not to make too much of it. He was putting down roots, carefully, in his own way, at his own pace. Vincent came to stand beside her. He'd left Elliot at the grave, which was the right instinct. The boy needed a moment that was just his. "Next week," Vincent said quietly, "I'm meeting with the attorney again, formally, with documentation." "Okay. It's going to be ugly for a while, when things start coming out." "I know. I don't want Elliot reading the news." "He's 8, she said. "He'll hear things. You can't manage all of it." She paused. "But you can be there when he does. That's the whole job." He was quiet for a moment. "I'm not good at it yet." "You're better than you were." "That's not the same as good." "No," she said, "but it's how good gets made." He looked at her with the expression she'd been watching change over 2 months, the one that started as the contained, gravity-pulling stillness of a man who controlled everything and had become something more porous, more uncertain, more willing to let things land on him rather than deflecting them. He was not finished either. He was carrying his own cost forward, the weight of 30 years of choices that could not be undone, only redirected. "Come back to the shop Friday," she said. "I'll have the left pedal problem figured out by then." He looked at her. The almost smile came, and this time it made it all the way. "Yeah," he said. "Okay." Elliot turned from his mother's grave and walked back toward them. He had his hands in his pockets again. His face was clear and quiet, in the way it was when he'd finished something and was ready to move toward what was next. He looked at Vincent. He looked at Claire. He stood between them in the November cold, and he didn't ask for anything or say anything portentous, because he was not that kind of child and never had been. "I'm hungry," he said. Vincent looked at Claire. Claire looked at Vincent. "There's a diner," she said. 2 blocks from the shop. Best eggs in the city if you don't mind the booths being slightly uncomfortable." "I don't mind," Elliot said. "Neither do I," said Vincent. They walked back to the car through the November cemetery, past stones and dormant grass, and the particular silence of a place where the dead are kept, so the living have somewhere to go with what they're carrying. Elliot walked in the middle, not holding anyone's hand, not needing to, just walking at his own pace between two people who had decided, separately and for their own reasons and at some cost, to stay. At the diner, Elliot ordered eggs and toast and ate everything on his plate. Vincent drank black coffee and managed half a plate of eggs, and spent considerable time attempting to fold a napkin into a flower shape, which was not successful, but which occupied him productively. Claire ate her eggs and watched them both and felt the specific warmth of being exactly where you're supposed to be without having planned it, which was the rarest kind of warmth, and didn't try to name it or hold it too tightly, because the things that matter most tend to stay longer when you don't grip them. At the end of breakfast, when the plates were cleared and the coffee was just warm enough to still be worth holding, Elliot reached into his pocket, the same pocket, the one that had carried his mother's flower for 3 months, and took out a small square of paper. He unfolded it. It was a fresh sheet, blank. He began folding. He worked for a few minutes in the particular silence that meant he was focused. Then he slid the finished flower across the table toward Claire. She looked at it. 12 petals even. Center exactly right. Her own technique, executed with the precision of a child who had been watching carefully since the first day. "It's better than mine," she said. He looked at it critically. "The third petal on the right runs slightly short," he said. "I see it." "I'll fix it on the next one." He pulled out another sheet of paper. She picked up the flower he'd made her and held it carefully. Outside the diner window, the November street moved with its ordinary morning traffic, people in cars, and the particular determined motion of a city that doesn't pause for anything, not grief, not change, not the slow work of becoming something different from what you've been. Elliot folded his second flower. Vincent watched him, elbows on the table, not performing patience but having it, the real kind that comes from deciding something rather than feeling it. The third petal on the right was even. Elliot held it up, examined it, set it on the table and looked at it for a long moment with the exacting quality he brought to everything he made. "Better," he said. And it was.